Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today, I'm going to be walking you through the Provar Quality Hub 3.23 release that we just released on the App Exchange. And in the setup, you can install it directly from the Provar Quality Hub setup. If you go into setup here, this may also be called Provar Manager setup if you're updating from a previous version that had that name. So we can go into here, we can go into plugins, click Quality Hub, and you'll see the latest release information there with the release notes, and you'll be able to install it directly from the app itself. You can also install it from the App Exchange by going into there. The version is available on the App Exchange, and you'll see the detailed release notes linked here as well, along with the setup and user guide that we have updated. So let's walk you through some of the changes. So overall, we've improved the visibility of text and labels for all the metric cards in Quality Hub to apply a little bit more of a contrast so you can see that a little bit more clearly. It's easier on the eyes across the board for all those metrics, and we've improved the visibility of text overall. We've also simplified the quality maturity score, so we changed a little bit of how the calculation was being performed to be a little bit more accurate. But we've also removed additional numbers here to reduce any confusion and display the percentage and the star exclusively. Additionally, if we scroll down, there were two metrics that we resolved some issues for. So overall ROI was previously not reporting any data if the grid ROI was 0. We have resolved this issue. Coverage growth was previously reporting automation coverage over time rather than automation coverage growth, i.e. going from 11% to 85% is a 677% growth. So we can look into this graph here and see that it's correctly showing coverage growth rather than just raw automation coverage over time. So we can see our previous coverage, current coverage, and our growth rate, our efficiency gain, and our maintenance overhead calculation was not working properly either. So we've resolved those things. Additionally, we had some issues with caching and changing date filters to different dates and using the correct cache behind the scenes. So in other words, if we change this to use 6 months, we already have an existing cache for 6 months. So it's going to immediately retrieve all the data there from the cache. Everything will be updated in the UI immediately. And if we select a date range that has not been cached, we'll properly see the metric processing here. And after some time, once the metrics have processed on the back end, which takes a few seconds, it will refresh the page and show us the latest information. So now if we switch back into 6 months, we'll see the latest version. And then the last 3 months, it'll now be cached. And so we can see that data live here. So all that is now working correctly in the Quality Hub dashboard. For the configuration pages, we've modified a couple of things. So in the metrics processing, the cache status and partition and calculated date now includes a timestamp, and it's all accurate. And we have an additional job for processing test cases as well that will show up here. The manual calculation was already working from previously, so that has not been modified. We have made a modification to the KPIs and thresholds tab where we've standardized on the tier labels and colors for the dashboard. So previously this was green, yellow, amber, and red. Now it's tier 4, 3, 2, and 1. And the colors are identical to the same colors that we're using on the actual dashboard itself. So that is consistent across the board. And we were calculating the prorated field previously, but we were not displaying it. So we've added a column here to display whether or not a metric or KPI is prorated. Additionally, what we've updated on the caching side of things to improve performance and usability is if you modify a metric, let's say I go from 90 to 95 for my automation coverage. Previously, it required the user to actually perform a full refresh of the page, and the refresh for the metric cards and the refresh all was not working properly. So currently this says 90 for our target. If we do a quick refresh here, we'll now see it says 95. So we can refresh those individual metric cards after KPIs have been updated, and it will refresh the card. Previously, this was requiring a full page refresh. You can also refresh all the metrics if you modify multiple KPI configs on the back end. So that's really it for the Quality Hub dashboard. Some other performance improvements. Now we have increased the row limit to over 50 million records with our async processing that's happening on the back end. So we shouldn't see any more issues with data at large data sets. So let's go into some of the updates that we've made for the setup. So in previously for our remote site settings, namely on these remote site settings here inside of the Quality Hub setup page. If you enable these and save the setting, for the first time, it will create the remote site setting. So for example, I've just enabled the Slack webhook API. So if I go into my Salesforce setup and search for remote site settings, you'll see it'll create a Slack webhook API remote site. Previously, the way that this was working for disabling remote sites, it was actually, if I disable this, it was removing the remote site, which was going to be an additional metadata deployment. And then if I needed to re-enable it, it would deploy it again. So we've actually modified this logic to be much more intuitive and a little bit easier to maintain. So now if I disable it and click Save Settings, it will actually just mark the remote site as deactivated, which works functionally the same behind the scenes to disable remote sites. So you'll see that has now been deactivated. And it works that way for all of our remote sites that we're utilizing from within this page. For our AI tab here, we have modified this to include a API hostname option. Now we have multiple layers of validation here to make sure that this API hostname is an accurate hostname. But we are all, for existing users, they won't see any impact. It'll continue to use the default. If you click change here, you can modify this to your own hostname, such as this, and click save. Right, so that will actually create a different version. So if I go into here, you'll see it modify the host name for the remote site setting automatically. So previously, if you needed to interact with any kind of custom URLs for any of our integrations, you would have to add remote sites manually. So that's now being updated automatically. So we can see that happening there. So now users can configure their own OpenAI API hostname if they have a different hostname other than the default. Okay, so let me move on to the GitHub Enterprise changes. This is the last bit here other than the bug fix that I'll mention. So for GitHub Enterprise, previously, if you were to create a version control system, VCS, and enable GitHub Enterprise Server, we've added an option here to actually configure your standard GitHub hostname. So for some users who may be using GitHub Enterprise but may not be using the on-prem version, they were unable to utilize this integration. So we've added this option to unblock them to allow them to connect to their GitHub instance and import their repositories and branches. So for example, I have a GitHub Enterprise here. So let me select my key here. So we'll see I actually have my remote site disabled for GitHub. So let me enable that. Which was that error there? All right, now I should be able to connect to the GitHub. So there we go. And if I go into here, I'm able to see my GitHub repositories directly from my GitHub Enterprise, which is this enterprise here with these repositories underneath this organization. So those are correctly showing up now with my standard GitHub API and my enterprise toggle that I've enabled within Enterprise Server. So we've added that option for GitHub Enterprise support. We also had an issue with Provar grid executions. So if you had a Provar grid execution, test execution, the videos were not loading. It was showing up with a pop-up window requiring you to log into Lambda test, and it would cache those credentials for the duration of your session. However, each day you opened up a new browser or the cache was cleared, you need to re-authenticate. So we've resolved that issue as well here. So if you go into your test execution now and you go into your results, the videos will now load, same as before. The only difference is it's a slightly larger window because of how we had to render this. But you can still play the videos. You'll still get full access to the video controls. And you can even open up the video in a new window here to control those execution videos. So that has been resolved and is now working in our latest build. So that's it for the Provar 2.3 release. A lot of exciting changes for the Quality Hub dashboard, some improvements to our remote site settings management and GitHub Enterprise Server expansion support, OpenAI API hostname configuration, and Provar grid test execution videos are now working properly.